Welcome to Bonehead Weekly, and this week we're talking about the most exciting genre of filmmaking of all time. This is the one that gets all the ladies and all the guys excited and ready to go to the cinema. Gentlemen, what are we talking about?
I'm trying to think of a
Fast and Furious films, right?
Oh
No.
God, these are actually more entertaining than Fast and the Furious films.
Well, I don't know. I've only ever seen most of them.
I don't know how to do this in a snobby accent, but I'm gonna try. Documentaries.
What documentaries? Those aren't directed by Michael Bay, and they don't star Vin Diesel. Why are we talking about documentaries?
Well, I
We
guess
already have a crappy viewership. Who watches a documentary?
there are so many good ones out there, though, and yeah. I'm sorry if this is going to shit on you all, but like when people think of documentaries, hopefully this isn't on your list, they think of like Grey Gardens and documentaries about World War II, and I'm like,
Hey, Band of Brothers.
that's not a documentary. That's a biopic. I guess that's a bio series.
But it's not even really based on real people, is it? Is it? I don't know. I've never watched it.
What, Band of Brothers?
Yeah.
Yeah, it totally is.
Oh.
They interview the real people.
It's bullshit. It's all bullshit. It's fucking shit that Tom Hanks made up when he was drinking the adrenaline gland of them.
Oh my God, is this going to be the episode where
James?
Here he goes. Chad said before we started that this is going to be a good one because James keeps freezing.
And it's because he moved locations. Move back to the other location where your Wi-Fi was fine.
Okay, hold on. I'll be back with y'all in a minute.
Anyway, so back to what I was saying. James really just does things with his mouth and fillets. Hi, there you go. God damn.
He went away.
He went away. I've actually
never to be seen again.
Are you telling me that World War II was a thing?
Yeah, last I checked. Well, if you talk to some people, they
Alex Jones was telling me something different. Are you telling me that guy may have lied to me?
In our conversation before the taping happens into the tape, it bleeds into the taping now.
Yeah, a little bit. So we try not to get too political, but I was telling the gentleman here that I finally found my line in the sand. If you support Alex Jones, we probably can't be friends.
Yeah.
What do you think, Chad? You and James, I don't mean to out you, but didn't disagree with me either.
If you watch that show, because I have seen snippets, I will never watch a whole show. I have seen snippets on other
show either.
I have watched snippets on other programming. I will never go that far as to sit down and watch, even though these people who showed these snippets watched the show.
Now, I watched almost all 3 hours of his Joe Rogan interview.
Oh, I don't know if I could ever do that.
It was tough because he just talks, and it's all, as you've told me before, bullshit. I mean, everything about his life, everything is all made up. It's all fabricated.
It's all gibberish.
Yeah.
But so luckily I'm not covering any documentaries on him. I don't know why I want to sound really, really snobby when I talk about.
You don't have to change anything about yourself.
Oh, I think I do.
Oh, see, you walked right into that. This is weird not having a third wheel.
I know, because usually he would chime in and go, well,
and do his Barney Fife. There you
go.
I wonder how long it's going to be.
Out of curiosity, when we talk about our because I could have gone a serious route, but I purposely chose not to. So are all of yours in entertainment related?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, the first one you're not even going to know. It is extremely obscure.
Most of mine
out of my ass.
Most of mine, because I kept picking and going, okay, well, do I want to talk about this one? And even though I liked it, I really love this one. And by the time my list got together, it was all entertainment related.
Yeah, I don't have as many, but I haven't quite made my mind up about 2 and 3. If that makes you feel any better, I'm still going back and forth. But one was,
I wasn't necessarily feeling bad about the decision.
Well, you should have been feeling bad about the decision the whole time. Actually, one was really easy. 6 months ago wouldn't have been easy, but it was one of those Chad Jennings we decide the topic and I pluck it from there. I didn't have to go do research, which I usually have to do. I
Yeah.
usually my pump needs to be primed. Take that how you will. And Chad normally just kind of plucks movies without doing research, and James and I usually go do research. That accurate?
That's completely accurate. I usually don't do research for movies. I don't Google
And then
anything.
it always adds. It's always a good kind of thing because we come bring some information in. We end up finding about lists that we think are bullshit, and we try to entertain you all. And James still isn't here.
Yeah, no.
He's still gone.
And
But
I always with my method of doing these, of just pulling it out of my general knowledge, I have lapses of forget about things. And months later, I'm like, we need to do another episode because I forgot to talk about this one.
Yeah,
I'm still beating myself up about character actors and not mentioning Luis Guzman, who's one of my favorite character actors of all time.
Well, that's not what you told him.
Yeah.
If you'd ever,
do we want to get started without James, or do we want to just wait?
I kind of just talking. You doing all right? How's your mother?
Yeah, she's good. She's good.
Well,
how about your mother?
She had a procedure Wednesday, nothing bad. I think everything's going to be fine. And I think she's just a hypochondriac. But what's funny is, and it was just doing a scope, and they have to do some sort of biopsy things. It's nothing bad, but they were putting a patch on her, and I'm trying to explain to everybody that my mom has this thing called Meniere's disease, and basically what it is, it's the same thing. If you're a big Huey Lewis fan, you can't hear very well, and it muffles everything, and you have to talk, and sometimes she hears you playing, sometimes you don't. Sometimes she just doesn't pay attention because that's
which is why it got its name, because if you talk to somebody and they aren't catching it, you go, "What's wrong with you?" Meniere's.
Funny.
I'm here all day.
So they're putting a patch on the back of her to keep her from passing out. Long story short, and I'm like, "It's okay, Mom. What they're doing is putting a patch for your really heavy nicotine addiction." And she's not laughing and never found me funny. And you can hear the doctor and the two nurses back behind the thing cackling, and it made my day.
So
not even a funny joke, but
James is back, and for those who are not watching,
and I brought the combination to the safe.
Oh my God,
Jesus Christ!
His crappy sound.
Yeah,
it's the same headset. I'm just talking very loudly.
Well, stop it.
And the fact that he actually took my advice, and moved to another location, to the original location where
I still didn't take your full advice. I'm actually on my laptop instead of the normal computer. There's a story there, but I'm not going to share it while we're recording.
That's good because Chad and I have been boring the hell out of each other.
And it involves porn.
Speaking of which,
I wish
that would be
James's
computer, not our conversation. And I thought our conversation was riveting.
Huh. See, you think you know somebody.
I know. That's what I was thinking. James, did you know World War II might have happened?
Yeah, Joe, it turns out. It turns out, Joe, if you go down to the veterans of the foreign wars and tell them it doesn't happen, them people get real upset.
Well, none of them are still there.
So, Jay,
of them are. Geez,
we'll get right into the topic, but I asked Joe this, so I'll ask you this since you're back on now. When I was trying to go through my list of documentaries to pick, and I was picking through my brain, like I actually removed all of mine are going to be kind of related to the entertainment industry in one way or another, except for one. How does yours fall into that category? Because I had a hard time. Like
I'm waiting to see what you all take from me.
Because I could have picked some serious ones, but I was like, no, I'm gonna go for the ones that actually I make me happy. Because I've been in that mood a lot lately. I've been like, I don't want to see depressing stuff. No, I've been looking for stuff that legitimately makes me happy, that makes me smile. And these are documentaries that do that, with the exception of one.
But you've never been happy.
I've been happy recently.
Oh, if you keep it up, you know he's going to break out into Pharrell Williams. Pharrell Williams. Yeah, he's
Pharrell Williams. We can't find him. He's out in the woods.
With all them cats.
All right, I'm going to go raccoons. I'm going to go first if you guys don't mind.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to tell you a short thing, and I do not want empathy or sympathy from anyone. It's just the way. It's been a rough few weeks. Several reasons, but one, my dad's been sick in the hospital. He's out of the hospital and he's feeling better. Thank you, Chad. But
I'm playing sad music to go along with
whilst he was in the horse pistol, one morning, as before I was leaving to drive all the way back to Lexington from Hazard, Kentucky, I was eating. I was hoping that they'd bring 2 breakfasts, so I wouldn't have to, so I could get something. And we were flipping through, and he bitched about the television the whole time we were in there anyway. Not as much as he bitched about the carrots and the food, but up there. And accidentally landed on KET at 6:30 in the morning because Dad's an early riser even in the hospital. And I watched a documentary that I watched 20 some years ago. And it's about where I grew up, and it's called The Big Lever. Now, The Big Lever is about Republicans and how this stronghold of, like a Republican Democrat, how a stronghold of Republicans in the county that I grew up, Leslie County, is so interesting and fascinating simply because, and James will understand this, surrounded by counties that vote nationally Republican, but local politics, what are they, James?
Oh,
Like
yeah,
Wayne
no, it's
County?
red.
They're red, but what are they registered as?
Oh, they're registered as
Democrats.
Democrats, yeah.
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 They're registered Democrats, but Leslie County is the exception. Perry County Democrat, blah, 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 Democrat, blah, but Leslie County is the exception. So much so that a place called Apple Shop in Whitesburg made a documentary about it. Now, in 1978, it is so red, and it is such a Republican stronghold, that they named the new gymnasium built next to the high school the Richard M. Nixon Center. Now, this is funny because by 1978, Joe Louis is born, but also, Chad, what had already happened before 1978?
Lots of stuff. There were dinosaurs at one point.
Yes,
not
but with Richard M. Nixon in
not
particular.
World War II. You're talking about the
Watergate. I was waiting for one of you
oh.
to say Watergate.
I thought you were talking about the environmental protection, the EPA.
Well, that's another thing. Nixon was the one that brought about. My dad always hated the EPA, and that's all Nixon. I always think that they never put 2 and 2 together, but it's all Nixon.
Yeah.
Like HMOs always go back to Nixon as well. But
Just like the only president to put out just even a slightest bit of gun control was Trump.
Oh,
in the history of everything.
Huh, that's interesting. But anyway, back to what I was saying, back to Nixon. So Nixon had already been ran out of office by 5 years, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, by the time they named the Richard M. Nixon Center. Now, while this is all going on, what also is fascinating is the county judge executive, C. Allen Muncie, is in the middle of a trial because basically there's a lot of dead people that did what, gentlemen? Voted for him when
There's
he would have
nobody.
won anyway. This is so funny. This is hilarious.
There is not a population in Eastern Kentucky of any stripe more than the dead that vote.
There isn't, especially back in the day. Now I'm going to
92% of the dead vote.
Vote often. For Nixon's, this is the film description right off of Apple Shop's website, and I'll make it quick. Nixon's first public appearance since resigning the presidency was in Leslie County, Kentucky in 1978. Okay? Think about that. That's his first public appearance, 1978. Introduces this incisive and sometimes hilarious look at the engines that drive American politics. The film explores the machinations of party politics in rural and staunchly Republican county. It says hollow to hollow, but we both know it's holler to holler. And vote hunting, family squabbles over candidates, patronage, promises such as whiskey and money, speech making on the courthouse steps, and the up and down career of the incumbent county judge, who was B.C. Allen Muncie. Sought re-election while under indictment for voter fraud conspiracy. Now, what's hilarious about all this, once again, not hilarious, but the reason I'm picking this is it's a 57 minutes long. You can watch it on Apple Shop's website, so it's available to stream on many different platforms. But I hadn't seen it in 20-some years, and I was rewatching it as a 40-some-year-old middle-aged man whose dad's in the hospital from a stroke, sitting there, right? And Dad, and I know these people because I know some of them because of Dad, like C. Allen Muncie sold my dad's gas to him. He owned a fuel distribution company on top of his judge executive and a bunch of other stuff to my dad. That's Dad's attorney who also went to prison with C. Allen Muncie. And it's just fascinating now when I was a kid, when I first saw it either in my late teens, early 20s, wasn't as fascinating. In my mid 40s, fascinating. That my elementary school principal was there on the documentary. I don't even remember him being in it. So my dad had never seen it and was getting into it. Going, what? That son of a bitch right there. Yada yada yada. I had the best time with this son of a gun at 6:30 a.m. in years, just kind of reliving memories, knowing some of these people who are really infamous. And one little bit of trivia left. C. Allen Muncie, who did go to prison along with Edmund Collett and another person. Edmund Collett was Dad's divorce attorney twice. And did go to prison, but they ended up getting exonerated and getting some of this over time after they did time. They were all able to practice again. I find all that fascinating. There.
No, I mean,
the big lever. And the big lever, I forgot once again, is in reference to voting straight party ticket.
Yeah.
And when it gets to the national elections, really the only thing that mattered in Leslie County wasn't the main vote. It was the primaries, because whoever got the primary was going to win, because you were going to vote straight Republican ticket, the big lever.
Yeah.
Gentlemen.
James, go ahead.
Sorry, that was long-winded. I don't usually talk that long. But
no, well, I just wanted to comment on that, because that's still, I mean, you said it's 20-some years old now, right? That documentary?
No, the documentary is from it was shot in 1978, but it's from 1982, directed by Francis Morton. So the documentary is now 41 years old, James. I hadn't seen it in 20 years, shot in 16mm. And there's some great, and by the way, being a 45-year-old man, one last thing, some of the t-shirts, the Greers would just be a saliva. Some of the vintage. There was a great kid with a fantastic Empire Strikes Back, and I was like, that son of a bitch, that right there, that's because it's shot from 78 to 80, you know.
Well, but and so what I think is really relevant about that, though, is so that's 40-some years old.
Yeah.
But how relevant is that still today?
It's the same thing. It is the same
certain areas.
It is not changed.
Yeah, I mean, and I think about members of my own family that have now. My family, because of a certain FDR, tends to be certain areas of my family, I should say. I don't want any of my relatives to listen to this. Anyway, listen to this.
Don't worry.
And think that I'm talking about them. But I do have some relatives. There is a small section of my family that are straight ticket Democrats.
Right.
But it's the same thing, right? I mean, I literally have heard them say, well, I'd feel bad about it if a terrible person ran as a Democrat, but if they get the ticket, I got to vote for them, right?
Yeah.
And I don't understand that mentality. But anyway, so I just wanted to say, it's funny to me that this is 40-some years away, and there's still parts of Kentucky that still very much function that exact same way.
It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed one little bit. The only thing that has changed is a lot of people are now, actually, a lot of the players in this are still alive. They're not even dead.
Some are on the fence.
They may be on the fence, but they're not dead yet.
Yeah. Well, so
James,
I'll go. This is one I mentioned it before, but I'm fascinated by it. I can't get it out of my head, which is a sign of a good documentary, I think. Is because I've seen a ton of documentaries. I'm like, that's interesting, and then I stopped thinking about it. But this one fascinates me, and I mentioned these two before, so they're going to know what I'm talking about. Simply because I never knew, like, I knew there are collectors, and I knew there are people who collect things that I don't collect. I did not realize that there was a time period called the 1990s when you could import something that was more valuable gram for gram. This is actually true, gram for gram, than cocaine or gold.
Now, is this the documentary that you and I watched a while back and both were fascinated by this one dude?
I can't stop thinking about it. It's like it's crawled into my head, and I'm like, I want to know what he's up to now.
He's a fascinating guy.
This gentleman, he does, and he admits it in the he has some mental, it's not mental disability. He has some neuroses.
Mm-hmm.
He's
nuttier and squirrel shit.
This is a story about a gentleman who literally almost didn't leave his house. He was kind of a shut-in.
Have you said the title yet?
No, I'm getting to it, because once I get the title, it'll. But do you remember, Joe, what his actual obsession was? It wasn't what he smuggled.
No, I don't remember.
It was cereal boxes.
Yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right.
He wanted cereal boxes, and he had them flattened. And then what he started to do, He didn't want the prize inside the cereal. Remember, this is the 1980s and 90s. His story starts. He didn't want the prize. He just wanted the box. And by the way, I was watching the movie again, and I was like, man, he does have like some rare boxes and some like, they have Star Trek on them,
I
Star
think I've
Wars
seen
from the
this.
releases. But he
Who
had to
knows?
find
He
a
won't
way.
get to the point.
Yeah, no.
He had to find a way to support his addiction. And what his son convinced him to start doing was selling the prizes that came in the cereal at like collector shows. So he started to leave his house. But then his son finds out that there are some people that are obsessed with collecting something, and that it is available in America, but that we don't get all of them, and that if he would just go to Europe and start smuggling them to America, he could make a fortune. And that's exactly what he does, because he starts to smuggle Pez.
Pez.
The movie is called Pez Outlaw, and it sounds ludicrous.
It's a lot of fun.
It really does, because it literally at one point, and Joe, I don't know if you remember this, the scene that fascinates me is where he goes, and that's when Pez America had people start to stalk me. And it cuts to somebody that represents Pez America and goes, that absolutely did not happen. And then it cuts to somebody else that works for Pez America, and they go, it absolutely did happen.
Did happen.
I was who they paid to follow him every time he went overseas. Because what he would do is he would go to Austria, I think is one of the first places he went.
He was going behind the Iron Curtain.
Iron Curtain.
James. He was there. These places were still communist run.
And he would go in and so he found one of the designers in one of the factories, because the way it works, and what's fascinating to me, it's also fascinating because of international copyright law, because Pez America failed to file one form. Because technically Pez America's agreement with Pez International is they wouldn't send anything that Pez America didn't approve.
Yep.
But because Pez America didn't file an import form with the TSA, that was unregulated. So he just goes over and fills up luggage with these Pez, and then he starts going to just hanging out at Pez factories, and he meets one of the designers. And he says, hey, can I see what you're designing? And that guy had designed, and now you can actually buy them in America, but it was Bubble Boy. It looks like a kid getting ready to blow a bubble gum. And at that time, they were just in prototype. But he goes, oh, that's really cool. And the guy literally goes, oh, I'm glad you like my work. Do you want some? And gave him the prototypes. And they weren't available in America. They literally were just stamped Pez, but that was it. And he comes over and he sells one right away for $15,000. And he has a suitcase full of prototypes.
Yep.
He ends up becoming ludicrously wealthy off of selling smuggled Pez. I won't give away the ending of it because it's got a really kind of tragic ending.
Let's just say it doesn't work out for everybody involved. But every time somebody denies it, there's somebody else in the interview goes, oh, no, that totally happened.
Yeah, that totally. I mean, they were stalking him. They were doing, but
that one guy did sell him prototypes. The one guy who was over the factory was selling to him.
Yeah, and it's funny because they go, I vaguely remember his name, and literally it shows photos of them together and stuff like that. It's just hilarious, but at the same time, it almost functions like a James Bond style movie. As Joe said, he's going behind the Iron Curtain. He is not. By the way, he doesn't speak the language.
And his son has to help him with everything because he has mental issues.
Yeah, he is a shut-in. And then one thing I will say is his wife gets sick. And that's when he says, he's tired of fighting. But it's just a fascinating look because there's this great scene early in the movie where you're like, oh, he's not dead because they're interviewing him for the documentary. But early on, the first time he goes behind the Iron Curtain, there's a roadblock. And his son pulls up. They have guns on them. And it cuts to him going, yeah, I assumed we were dead. And then his son goes, I'm just going to put the car in reverse and see what happens. They just back away slowly and nobody chases them. It's a fascinating documentary about intellectual property and all that stuff. But at the heart of it is this guy that just liked cereal boxes and needed to support his fandom. It's fascinating. It's one of the most compelling, just because I literally put it on because like Pez Outlaw, what's this about? I was like, I'll give it 10 minutes. And if I'm not by 10 minutes, I was like, no, I got to see how this guy's still alive. I got to see. It's fascinating. So if you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix, I believe. Pez Outlaw. Yep. It's a very human story that's also sometimes funny, sometimes tragic, but it just shows you This guy had an idea. Actually, his son had the idea, but he followed through and he just kept going, what are they going to do to me? What are they going to do to me? And he did it for decades, almost 2 decades.
And truthfully, they didn't really do a lot other than finally stop a lot of it. Well, not
yeah,
giving
they
too much
found a
away.
way to, they found a way to take away his power, so to speak. But by then, had he played the game
And he
and
played
got
the
out while he
long
was dead,
game. The long
had
game. Yes.
he would have been okay. But he kept. But I mean, he literally paid for. He had people working for him. He paid their way through college. I mean, the amount of people he actually helped is another fascinating part of it. So, Pez Outlaw, it shouldn't make sense, but good Lord, it's a fascinating documentary that's a lot of fun.
Yep. Chad.
Ooh, I don't know where to go. I'll be honest with you.
Hell.
So I'm
Satan's a heating his pitchforks for you.
Well, since James talked about the Iron Curtain, I'm gonna keep on that track.
Hold on. For those of you that may be in my family, and you're wondering what he's saying, that's Arn Curtain.
Arn Curtain.
Sorry, I was just translating for my family. Go ahead, Chad.
I want to talk about a great documentary called Chuck Norris versus Communism. Gentlemen,
that's one you've got me. I've seen Pez Outlaw twice, 3 times, once in slow-mo. But the point
he's 3 times a lady, and I don't know what you're talking about.
So Chuck Norris versus Communism is an amazing documentary. It's about Romania in the 1980s, where the communist regime was so oppressive that the people couldn't do anything. They had them pretty much locked down to working and going home, and that was it. There was no outlet for these individuals. So it's about this documentary about how this secret group of people would smuggle in bootlegged VHS copies of American movies, and they would have these viewing parties in basements or people's apartments. And of course, because they were in English and the people in Romania were so blocked out from the rest of the world, they had this secret two people who would translate over what the actors were saying in the movies into Romanian, so the people could actually enjoy the movies. And it's all about how this secret underground of VHS tapes traveled into the cities, and it honestly, and in a lot of the ways, the filmmaking and the art of film helped inspire these people to rise up against communism. It's a great movie, and they talk about the movies that they watched. Chuck Norris was one of them, because they could easily get a hold of Canon films on VHS, but they talked about,
and the plot didn't matter,
right? Getting a hold of Bruce Lee films and other movies, and it would just and movies. I'll be honest with you, it was hard to watch because the actors would be Chuck Norris would be talking, but over Chuck Norris would be a woman who was just basically repeating what they said in Romanian. But this was their going to the movie theater every Friday night. It was these people in these basements and small apartments crammed in like 30 at a time, watching these American movies that we take for granted. It's a great story, and they do a lot of reenactments throughout the whole documentary and interviewing the people who were living there at that time and what this meant for them. It's a great moving picture, especially if you love film.
Well, I was going to say, and I think that's fascinating because I haven't seen it, but now I want to, because I think that's the entire thing. Is there is something about film, even if you don't speak the language of the film, right? I mean,
right.
You can convey an image and it has emotions, even if you don't have the words.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that. Last night I watched 3,000 Years of Longing.
Yeah, how was it?
The volume was down.
I know. I legitimately enjoyed it. I thought it was a great film. Tilda Swinton, she's one of my favorite actresses. She can do no wrong. And Idris Elba, another amazing
Tilda Swinton, by the way, for those that don't know who she is, you'll know her best from Constantine.
Anyway,
it's a great role, Chad, and she does it well. She does it well. I don't care what you think about the movie, but she does that role well.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's on 2 streaming services now. It's on Paramount Plus and it's on Amazon Prime. I chose Amazon Prime, so I didn't have to deal with the ads. I could just watch the movie. Um, but there's a lot of Idris Elba back long ago talking these different languages, and there was no subtitles. And I had no idea what was going on, but I was too enthralled with his performance and the other actors' performances to care. It was only midway through that I found out that, and it's true with a lot of Amazon Prime films, if there's subtitles, they don't add the subtitles. You have to go. Yeah, I don't know why.
I think I found that out before too. I can't remember.
Yeah, so I went to.
There's an actual thing you have to do, right?
No, there's nothing you can do. They actually turn it off. I could be wrong about this. I couldn't find anything.
I thought
maybe
you
I
could
need to
go
look
in
at-
and there's basically a button you can click, but I forgot how.
Apropos of nothing, gentlemen, by the way, but have you ever watched any of our episodes with the auto-generated subtitles on?
No, I should.
I can only imagine.
Oh,
it's awful.
it is a good time. No, it does a pretty good job, but when it messes up, it's
Spectacular.
it's oh yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, but I switched to Paramount Prime just so I could actually see the subtitles, and I'm like, it helped because there was parts where like, oh, that makes sense now, but honestly, yeah, I can see. Back to James's point, it was just enthralled with the movie, the images, the reactions, the drama, and that's what these people went through. So yeah, it's a great film, especially if you love history, history about anything communism and movie making. It's a great film to watch. Joe.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. I'll have to go back to that. There's a whole subtext or subset of people who think, Dallas had as much to do with bringing down the wall as Reagan, if not more, because people got entertainment, wanted to go live those lives and didn't, like you were talking about.
What? Yeah, no, it's just Reagan bringing down communism. It had nothing to do with Reagan.
Right. So
it was 5 other presidents.
Now, this one is a little bit, actually, this one's political, so it leads right into when I was trying to pick my second one. The first one was because I had a really great experience, not only with the documentary and knowing people, but also with my dad, and it makes sense. And by the way, I forgot to say, see Alan Muncie talking about the liberal media and why they were coming after him because of naming this Richard M. Nixon Center. James, back to your point of nothing really changes.
No.
It's the same shit, just regurgitates. I'm going to move on.
I do want to point out real quick, if you want to see about how history is never changes, the Dollop podcast, that they do deep dives in a lot of history. They're a history podcast, and they do a lot of deep dives, and they go show you, yeah, nothing's changed. It's always been this way.
I mean, and I'm ruining my own career here, but I'm going to say it. Everything that I've published as a quote unquote scholar has been centered on the idea, oh, you think this is new? Let me show you. I mean, my most cited research now, by the way, now cited by 30 different sources, is a history of pandemics in higher education, right?
Yeah.
And why did that catch on? Because of COVID.
Yes.
I started to work on it before COVID ever happened, but then COVID happened, and then, oh, what does it look like? Oh, people were required to wear masks, and then people protested the mask. None of that stuff is new. None of us are original. If we looked at history, we would know this all happened before with previous pandemics and epidemics and all that stuff. We're just repeating it, but we're too silly to look backwards and see the solutions that happened then. And that's how I claim to fame.
Which leads me to the documentary I want to pick that I caught maybe 15 years ago, whenever, and it has stuck with me. And it was hard picking because this is a fairly serious, actually, both of these are kind of serious, but this one's really serious. It's The Fog of War, directed by Errol Morris, about Robert McNamara. If you don't know who that is, he was a genius of his time, but he ended up being the Secretary of, I think, Defense for who?
Just tell us, Joe.
Kennedy.
Just say.
I was hoping you sons of bitches would love.
I thought it
Kennedy
was,
and then a little bit of Nixon. So in Johnson.
Yeah.
So he continued until 1968 under President Johnson. I thought he was actually under Nixon, but he wasn't. And he's actually famous a little bit before then, just for making cars, because a lot of people talk about Oh, what's his name ran for president? Oh God, my mind just slipped. He used to run all the time with the Green Party. So he's the one that
Oh,
put seatbelts in cars.
Oh, Nader.
Nader. But actually,
Right, man.
McNamara is one that came up with and was brought into the automobile industry of how do we, because there was people were dying and a lot of people were dying on the roads in the late 50s, early 60s.
right.
Basically, it was the idea of, well, how the hell are we getting eggs to your house? How are we getting eggs to the store? Does that make sense to you, gentlemen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they took that and applied it to cars. The reason the cars are more safe today. It's just one of many. And he was brought in to be this person during the Kennedy administration. But what he's Secretary of Defense, but what he's really kind of famous and infamous for is that the Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam, all these things that happened during that time happened under him. And he wrote a book about how to, well, let's see what the title is. It's basically the books, about how not to get into trouble, how you try to, of course, over the documentary, he distills McNamara's philosophy into 11 basic tenets. Okay. Lesson number 1 is empathize with your enemy. He even ended up talking to some of the people in Vietnam afterwards. And if he, back to James, your point, if they had studied Vietnam and actually thought about it, nothing had changed there either.
Yeah.
Nothing had changed there either. And they weren't a student of history. Lesson 2, rationality alone will not save you. He actually says a lot of the stuff that happened that prevented us from having a nuclear war with Kennedy, Khrushchev, and Castro when it came to the Cuban Missile Crisis was stupid luck. It was more than likely that it would have happened. There are some things that are beyond oneself, is lesson number 3. Number 4 is maximize efficiency. Number 5 is proportionality should be guideline in war, right? So you cannot destroy, talks about portions of cities destroyed in Japan by the U.S. before the dropping of the nuclear bomb, comparing the destroyed Japanese cities to similar sized cities in the U.S. Tokyo, roughly the size of New York City, was 51% destroyed. He says LeMay once said that had the United States lost the war, they would have been tried for war crimes, and agrees with his assessment. Does that make sense? Especially for dropping the 2 big bombs on Japan. But we didn't lose the war. Lesson 6, get the data. Number 7, belief and seeing are both often wrong. Number 8, be prepared to re-examine your reasoning. Number 9, in order to do good, you may have to engage in evil. Number 10, never say never. And number 11, you can't change human nature. Talks about the fog of war and how many things only become clear in hindsight. When you're in the middle of, why does the Vietnam War happen? Because you're in the middle of it and you think you're fighting communism. And you feel that if Southeast Asia falls, communism will spread even more throughout Asia, then throughout Europe. You think this is going to happen, and you're not a student of history. And these are really smart people.
Oh,
But
by the
you're
way,
in the fog of war. It's a fascinating documentary, and it's all archival footage and him being interviewed. James.
what I was going to say, you reminded me, and this is a graphic novel if you're interested, and it's by a French gentleman who I'm blanking on the name of. If anybody wants to look it
James,
up,
are you on Mars?
what?
Are you on Mars right now?
No,
You sure? Because those sunglasses, it really looks like you're looking out at Mars right now.
no. And if I was, I wouldn't tell you
It
because I
does
can't
kind
wait
of
till
look
you.
like it's either Mars or the Savannah. Hey now, hello.
I can't wait till we
Oh
conquer you
God, it would be
humans.
so great if a lion just came and chomped on his head right now.
Oh,
I'm at home in the basement.
no.
James, your
No,
head.
I can't comment. But once you humans fall, anyway. No, what I was going to say is there's a really great graphic novel, and there's a follow up they did, and it's by a French
James, there's a meerkat
gentleman.
eating your nose. No, it's not.
It's by a French gentleman. I'm blanking on the name of, but it's called The War of the Trenches, and it looks at
His
World
name
War
is
One. It looks at World War One, and it's him telling the story of his grandfather. But it's really fascinating. If you get a chance, I know you all don't read books, but if you get a chance, you should. War of the Trenches is one of the most compelling. Much like Joe, you talked about. What's that movie you keep talking about? Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah,
It is
Quiet on
much
the
the
Western Front's
same.
very good.
It is much the same way, except it's done as a
Awesome.
graphic novel because he tells a story about how his grandfather was bringing food to soldiers in the trenches, and you know, getting shot at while he was trying to do it because you had to get down into the trenches, and
You got to get down in the
he
trenches.
got
Yeah.
he got pinned down by enemy fire, and he had to spend the whole night
Is this your documentary?
down. No, but anyway, it turns out he was on top of a bunch of corpses that had started to decay, and he
Yeah.
thought he was in mud, but it was just people's intestines and stuff. But anyway, it's another great thing to look at. So if you get a chance, the first book in the series is called War of the Trenches, and it's about World War One from the
All right.
French point of view. Anyway, am I supposed to do a documentary now?
That'd be great.
I'll give it a shot. Actually, Joe, it's funny that you brought up an Apple Shop one because I'm trying to do the ones that have stuck with me. Pez Outlaw's fun. This is a documentary I saw shortly after it premiered, and it played at, I don't know, the Guggenheim and a bunch of film festivals. But then for some reason, Apple Shop,
Yeah.
in their infinite wisdom, said, "Hey, let's bring it to this." I don't know. I would have been maybe a junior in college. We'll bring it to this classroom and show students on campus, and so I went to a screening of it on campus. But it's one that, when I first watched it, I didn't know it would stick with me, but I can remember it well 20 some years later. And it's called Stranger with the Camera. Have either of you all seen Stranger with the Camera?
It
Only
sounds
with
familiar.
candy.
So it does a fascinating job, and it's directed by Elizabeth Barrett, who grew up in Letcher County. And it's about her, like, she's trying to look back at something that happened in her youth and analyze it. And the reason it's called Stranger with a Camera, and you all know this story well, at least in theory, about it every few years it'll flare up again, right? There'll be this, people coming, like, it's now been several years ago, but American Idol did that thing where it talks about Eastern Kentucky and they all have Mountain Dew mouths and all, and a lot of people in Eastern Kentucky got mad because, we're not all like that. You're not showing the true Eastern Kentucky, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
This documentary actually looks at one of the most extreme cases that, again, history repeats itself. But in 1967, Canadian filmmaker Hugh O'Connor was part of a large group. There was a bunch of filming that happened in Eastern Kentucky that was trying to document poverty because there was a war on poverty.
Nutrition.
That had started years earlier. Well, Hugh O'Connor is a Canadian filmmaker dispatched to Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, to document all of this poverty and stuff like that. The problem is, a lot of that poverty had already been documented, and a lot of Kentuckians were getting sick of being made fun of by national media about, look, they're all poor, dumb, ignorant, backwards people, hillbillies, yada, yada, yada. And so one afternoon, when Hugh O'Connor was home,
Yeah.
they were staying with a family in a rental house in Jeremiah, Kentucky. And the landowner found out they were there filming. And of course, it was on his land. He, in his view, had not invited them to film there. He was not happy that they were, in his point of view, making Kentucky look like ignorant, backward savages.
Right.
So what did Hobart Eisen do?
Pulled a gun.
Killed him. Didn't just pull it, shot him dead.
Yep.
Now, what's really interesting about this, though, is it's Barrett she interviews both sides. She goes back and she goes, she finds these people and goes, no, Hobart was right. He was making yet another documentary saying, not how can we lift these people up or how can we address the issue. It was another look at these dumb, ignorant people. Aren't you glad you're better than them? Now, of course, she interviews the other side, and they were like, "No, that's not who O'Connor was. O'Connor wanted to tell the whole story. O'Connor wanted to show these are people with a proud heritage, and they have a background, they have a history." Right. And Barrett goes through, and she keeps going both sides, and she, in her own words, is trying to find a resolution to it because it happened when she was in high school, and she's trying to figure out which side makes more sense. Or maybe she was elementary school, middle school, but she remembered it. when Eisen went on trial for the murder in 1968, it was a hung jury, 11-1 for conviction. So they have to do a retrial. He's sentenced to 10 years in prison. He serves 1 year and is released. But what I find compelling about it, and what I do remember the most about is, at the end, Barrett includes herself in the documentary, and she says it has no resolution because both sides are arguably right. Both sides have realized that, there are people that want to exploit Eastern Kentucky. I mean, quite frankly, there's a long history of Eastern Kentucky being exploited.
Correct.
Of the Appalachian region being exploited.
Right.
But on the other side, how can we address the issues that are real if we don't let people know these are real issues, right?
Right.
And so Barrett has a couple different quotes, and I'll read these quickly, then I'll shut up. Barrett concludes the documentary saying a couple of lines, and I'll quote some of the lines. The ties that bind communities together are not always positive. Suspicion of those who are different, defining yourself only in opposition to others, these can tie a community together, but can also lead to violence. As I said, she admits that there's no resolution, despite her hoping to find one. And she then ends the documentary posing this question: what are the responsibilities of any of us? And keep in mind, she's a filmmaker herself. What are the responsibilities of any of us who take the images of other people and put them to our own use?
Mm-hmm.
It's a fascinating documentary, and it's one of those things. And Joe, I know you have a story about somebody getting killed
Over a dog,
over a dog. But you tell that story one way, and people are like, "Oh, that's how uncivilized." But at the same time, if you're in that environment, that kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this a really compelling documentary, because even if you just heard my summary and went, "Oh my God, he killed him just for filming," but at the same time, if you're a landowner and you own rental properties at that, and you have somebody showing up going, "Oh, don't live here. God, look at how awful this place is."
Right.
That's somebody literally trying to destroy your livelihood. Now, was O'Connor actually doing that? Again, she talks about in the documentary that no, a lot of his other films actually show, well, here's the complete story. So would it have been that? We'll never know. But again, as Joe mentioned, an Apple Shop film. This is another Apple Shop. If you've never seen anything about Apple Shop, check out some of their stuff. It is obviously set around Appalachia, but they're fascinating documentaries. And so Stranger with a Camera is a great one. And if you get a chance, check it out, because it is a very human story. It runs about 60 minutes.
Right.
Came out in 2000.
All right. Chad.
My words, you guys are so serious.
I know.
Why so serious?
So I did not go this route. So I love stand-up comedy. I'm not a big fan of concerts. I don't really care for going to see a group perform on a stage of music that I could hear perfectly fine on a CD and not deal with insane people. But I will drop a hat to go see a stand-up comedian at any time.
Why would you need to drop your hat?
Yeah, because sometimes it's distracting to other people when I wear my big pimp hat everywhere I go.
I was going to say,
why do you have a big pimp hat?
It's the fact that you demand on wearing Slash's hat everywhere.
I think there's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't.
Nah, I can't think of any. But so there's 3 comedy documentaries on my list, but I wanted to pick out the one that stands out the most to me, and that is Gilbert.
Oh, that was the best movie I saw 2 years ago.
It's a documentary about Gilbert Gottfried. Now, we lost Gilbert Gottfried last year. It's one of those.
Well, maybe he'll turn up.
It's one of those deaths that
we just got dig.
Yeah, that's true. And Gilbert would laugh if he heard it. I actually probably say that was a pretty hack joke, but
yeah. Well,
he'd be hacking on dirt, bitch.
He was one of those deaths that I took hard. It was, I've never met the man, never seen him, don't know him personally, but it hit me hard. Gilbert Gottfried was one of those people who been around since I was young. I love his podcast. His comedy, is not for everyone. It's a very odd comedy. He actually he kept some of his bits from when he first started still in his act till he passed. He reinvented himself barely. But watching this documentary about being with Gilbert, about who Gilbert was, fascinated me for the hour and 45 minutes it was on.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, you think Gilbert's this crazy maniacal nutball, but in reality, he's just a husband and a father. Huh?
He's still fairly crazy.
He's still fairly crazy. The whole thing about him and his what he got from hotel rooms is borderline nut. It's bizarre.
Yeah, it's like my mom had a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, at the same time, he was a loving son, loving brother, family man. You know, he was a really good guy. Just had his own eccentricities. Eccentricities. Thank you. I couldn't get it out.
The two parts about that documentary that I love and that I remember really, really well, and they've stuck with me because again, it's been a couple of years since I've seen it.
Yeah.
But he has a line, and I think he attributes it to Orson Welles or somebody else. I may be wrong, but it's that it doesn't matter who you are, the talent enters through the kitchen. Like you don't walk up the main door if you're the talent, you have to enter through the back.
It's a great line.
And then his entire thing about first thing I do when I get off stage is I wash out my socks. I don't know why that part of the doc. And then he has that entire thing. Do you remember this, Chad?
Yes, I remember
the sock thing.
Where he has the entire thing about.
Oh yeah.
Then he goes off on the mini tirade, not really a tirade. He's saying it perfectly calmly, but he goes, "I've read that the bubbles don't mean anything, so don't worry about the bubble." Like he just keeps going on about washing out his socks in the hotel sink after a show.
Yeah,
but it's one of those things that I don't know. I found it oddly even more endearing to me. Like I liked Gilbert Gottfried before, but then it's like his number one concern when he gets off stage is I need to wash up my socks. I mean, it's not, it's not I'm going to go pop some champagne or do cocaine or some of the which I don't. Yeah, but no, it really humanizes him, and at the same time, I walked away from that documentary being reminded it doesn't matter who you are. If you're of a certain age, you've been exposed to Gilbert Gottfried.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it be Disney, whether it be car or whether it be insurance commercials, whether it be nobody escaped Gilbert Gottfried.
And there's like one of the best stories as I still remember the story. Gilbert Gottfried never took a plane or a car. He drove a bus. He went on a bus to every show. And I just remember Bill Burr ripping on him. Them interviewing Bill Burr about why the hell does he still take a bus? Why does he go on that? I'm not going to quote it because I don't remember the quote, but Bill Burr just ripping on Gilbert for taking a bus is hysterical. And then too, you see him recording his podcast, and that's still, I don't know if Joe ever went back to listen to it, and I don't think Jane, but Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal Podcast was one of my favorite things to listen to.
I used to listen to him all the time. I haven't listened to him in a while.
Right. But what I was saying is I don't know if you listen to the very last one.
Mm-mm.
And Frank Santrapadre, who was his co-host, got on and did this amazing eulogy at the end of it. And I cried. I was in my car crying. Like I had, I've almost had to pull over because it was so deep. And I always thought back to this documentary about, it made you feel like you were a friend of his because it got so personal with Gilbert. And I highly recommend Gilbert as something to check out.
And he's a huge ass geek. You're both leaving one important thing about him. He's a big.
He had a life-size Frankenstein in his.
He loved horror films. There is a Fango from the '80s where he would hang out in Fangoria and going through the magazines. Now I know why. Cheap bastard wouldn't buy them.
And he was obsessed with models. He loved models. Like if you listen to him on his podcast, he always talked about his Universal Monster models.
Yeah, he's just a big ass nerd like us.
Yeah.
All right. My last one is, I was going back and forth, gentlemen, because there's one I like a little bit better than this, but we've talked about it on the show quite a bit, and it's an Eastern Kentucky thing, and I think we've killed Eastern Kentucky enough. But I discovered this documentary when I was 15, 16 years old, and I also became obsessed with a lot of the music because these two gentlemen know that my taste in music is 20 years, if not more, before my time. The Woodstock documentary is one of my thing. I wouldn't say it's the best documentary ever made, but it's also probably one of the documentaries I've watched the most, simply going back to relive and watch the live music of probably, who knows, arguably one of the greatest concert venues and definitely the most remembered of any of all time. Woodstock actually lost money, and where they made the money was from this documentary, because it ended up making $50 million when they sold the rights to the documentary, because it was all documented when these guys put it together. Michael Lang and I can't remember the other, when they put it together, Woodstock didn't make money. It was on August 15th to 18th, 1969, with probably some of the greatest performers, most of them now dead, there. And have either one of you ever bothered to watch the whole documentary, or have you just probably
I'll be
seen it?
honest, I've seen parts, but I haven't.
I
never sat down
haven't,
and
because
watched.
it's Woodstock isn't something that interests me.
But it's
So-
probably the greatest musical festival of all time.
Did you not hear my last conversation?
I was gonna say, he
about-
just
I
said he
know,
doesn't.
but I sat there listening to him going, you also just hate America. I don't know that I would have enjoyed being there, but I would have loved to have been there. There's someone who I got to talk to recently in the last year or two who was there. He remembers parts of it
Well, by the
for
way,
obvious reasons.
the reason I'm laughing is, for some reason, you talking about it, I flash back to, and it's not a sketch that gets played often from Family Guy, but there's a Family Guy episode where Stewie goes, "Yeah, like the time I performed at that big rock concert," and it's Woodstock, of course.
Yeah.
And he's talking about how some of these bands need to calm down, and then he gets on and he, of course, plays the song "Establishment, Establishment." You always know what's best.
So the
And I don't
movie,
know why I find that
the
hilarious.
movie came out in 1970 on March 26th. It's almost 4 hours long. I can't imagine. Can you imagine a documentary coming out today, almost 4 hours long, making $50 million? And we're talking $50 million that time.
Yeah. No, I mean, it would be.
There's no
I'll
way.
be honest. There's people that are a little bit nervous about the fact Oppenheimer has a close to a 4-hour runtime. Somebody said. And
I've
people
got to
are-
see that. But
I-
it's
yeah,
still
no, I'm
it's
going.
still setting at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. And if you've never done it, if you're interested in the music and interested in counterculture, and I was
If you've never done Woodstock, I don't think
if you've never
the majority of people
watched
have.
if you've never watched the documentary, I was obsessed with counterculture, and I probably still have a lot of interest in it, just not as much as I did at 15, 16, 17 years old.
Joe,
500,000
it's time to take that rotten cheese off your kitchen counter, buddy.
500,000 people. That's counterculture.
Yeah.
That's a really big stretch on that joke. 500,000
Is it?
people.
Is it? Is it
A little
really?
bit. The National Guard, medical
Nee.
supplies. And do it for nothing else other than to watch Country Joe and the Fish perform live. Country Joe and the Fish. So check out Woodstock. I was trying to find where it was actual streaming, and I can't find it without having to pay for it, which is really sad. I should own that on DVD. Who's next?
Not Blu-ray or 4K, just DVD.
Well, it's probably all
Savage.
shot in 16 millimeter. It's like watching Evil Dead on Blu-ray high def, going, well,
Yeah.
yeah, there's the lines.
Yep.
Not
James,
the same
go.
as watching my grainy version growing up, going, I don't know what to mean. This doesn't look too bad on the third generation copy
on a much smaller television,
on a
probably
much
too.
smaller television. Yeah.
I wasn't going to do it because I've talked about it before, but if we're talking about documentaries that stuck with us, and that also
We are
have
talking about
100%.
documentaries.
Yeah, but that also
was
have
a whole
100%.
That's you were the one who made the
100%
final decision on it today about it being documentaries instead of next week's episode.
Oh, well, I know, but 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and y'all knew I'd bring it up, didn't you? Y'all have set me up for this. A documentary that started filming in 1981, originally for a segment that was supposed to air as part of PBS, and then took on a life of its own, following one Harlan J. Ellison. Dreams with Sharp Teeth. 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. And honestly, you don't have to like Harlan Ellison. Matter of fact, if you like Neil Gaiman, buy the DVD. Honestly, there's a 30-minute bonus feature of them sitting around eating pizza.
Robin
Neil
Williams,
Gaiman,
if you're a Robin Williams fan, buy it.
Robin Williams and him were really close. And he's not in the documentary, but later in his life, Patton Oswalt and him were really close. Patton Oswalt, Ellison, after this documentary, had a stroke, and Oswalt was one of the first people to visit him in the hospital. and came out going, no, he's fine. He was aggravated because he couldn't remember the name of a silent film star for about 5 minutes, and he was getting aggravated. But other than that, his memory is great. But originally, this was started, a 24-year-old student, Eric Nelson, was originally hired by PBS to shoot footage of him typing on his typewriter, and that footage is in the documentary. But then Ellison said, if you want to keep filming, you can. And so if you watch the documentary, you can tell it shot at all different times across several different years. And Ellison treated him, and this is a quote, as a fan working on a student project for the rest of the time. And there's footage and thing where he literally talks to him like, do you know how to shoot? Are we wasting my time? Don't waste my time. But it has, if you follow us on Twitter, we have shared the footage often. That Pay the Writer footage, very relevant to what's going on right now with the WGA, comes from this documentary. And so this was shot literally over the course of 20 years of just dropping in on Ellison at different times, whatever he was ranting and raving about at the time. And Ellison is a phenomenal writer. But Ellison was also somebody that has always pushed back against whatever was going on. He marched with MLK. That's a great story. But he also was known for being pretty cantankerous.
What?
For more information, see the episode where we did pretty much after his death. We did an entire episode about it, and there's a great story about how he treated Joe and I.
He treated me wonderfully. He hit you.
Well, I mean, I earned it.
And by wonderfully, I said, hey, James, watch this.
And also, you got told what you should go do.
Phenomenal writer.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely phenomenal.
I just wanted to piss both of y'all.
Well, you didn't make me mad.
No,
yes, I did. Obviously, you looked up.
You showed you have no taste, but other than that, but so the film has screened several different times.
I hope the vacuum of space sucks you in any minute.
It would still be better than a conversation with somebody that doesn't know what a great writer is. Anyway,
no, wait. You said phenomenal.
He was also great. He was both, Chad.
I mean, he was good.
He could walk in both worlds, Chad. No, but there's also, even if you don't care about him as an author, even if you don't, there's also very, very human moments in it, because Nelson finds footage of his father, and Ellison lost his father when he was 12. And he had not seen
maybe he'll turn up.
He had not seen footage of his dad, and this filmmaker finds it, and they record him seeing his dad move on film for the first time since he was 12 years old. And by the way, he found his own father dead. He's a very fascinating individual. And so it's very interesting, because Ellison was somebody that was quoted by Stephen King. He pops up in a lot of different things. Honestly, less people know about him today than did in the 60s and 70s when he was huge. But it's a fascinating story about different things, about one man's writing, about one man's life, and about things they did. And the only thing Ellison ever went back and said about the documentary was he saw a rough cut and he said, there's no women. There's no women and no people of color. And I assure you, I've worked with both over the years. And he made Nelson go back and interview different writers. Ellison gets credit for discovering Octavia Butler, for instance, and some other people, and encouraging her writing. And if you don't know who that is, go read her works, because another phenomenal author. But anyway, it's just a great documentary about somebody that was honestly, near the end of his life, more known for his personality than his writing.
That's true.
But both to me are absolutely fascinating. And I think,
who wrote better than Ellison? The person who wrote those Bazooka Joe comics. That's fantastic.
By the way, actually,
fantastic.
I said fantastic. All those little, that whole story in that little bitty piece of paper.
I think you
Ellison
you said fantastic.
Shit.
Yeah, I was gonna say I heard fantastic too.
Fantastic.
Anyway,
I think in your head you said it.
Yeah, I mean, Ellison at least can say the word fantastic. Anyway, the point being,
I don't know, Jerry. Say it. Show me your recording.
Did you hear Jerry Reed say it? What?
Jumped up and bit him. Sorry.
Anyway, but no, there's so much in the documentary. But again, as Joe said, Robin Williams in there. Actually, the beginning of it is fascinating and a lot of fun because it's Robin Williams reading all the rumors about him online and him answering yes or no to all of it. Like, pushed a fan down an elevator shaft. That never happened. Punched the producer of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or something. That did happen, and he deserved it. I mean, it's just funny because it's Robin Williams, and then they interview Robin Williams about him later on, and Robin Williams tells the story. He goes, literally one of the first times I met him, I go in and he's riding, and he's at the typewriter, but there's 4 random women just lounging around in various states of undress, and then Robin Williams, being Robin Williams, goes, women love does an entire brief solo about how women love the little Hasidic Jewish boy or something. It's a fascinating documentary just about what it was to be a writer, because it also does talk about his, as the time period he refers to as honorable whoredom at a penny a word, when he wrote under 15 different names, and sometimes he wrote the entire journal or the entire it would have been a pulp magazine. But they, of course, didn't want to say every story was by him, so he would be, you know, he'd made up different names for everything, and then he would sell it. But and so he talks about what it was like starting out as a writer too. So it's a fascinating slice of life, but also shots of the time. It's I had other ones that will be honorable mentions, but I couldn't not mention it because it is a documentary that means a lot to me.
Chad.
Cool. I will
Send
say
us home.
this: my honorable mentions. You'll have to let me get through my honorable mentions because I got quite a few. But I want to. My last pick is going to be one. I mentioned how much I love comedy, and the filmmaking. But I cannot express, if you want to go see how much of a cartoon fanatic I am, go look at our previous episodes where we talked for 5 or 6 episodes about 80s and 90s cartoons.
Yeah.
There's a great documentary called I Know That Voice, where it goes and interviews all the different voice actors who you don't normally see, and get their opinions on the craft, how they actually do the jobs that they do. It is phenomenal. You get to see all of them, and so like if you want to see D. Bradley Baker, you may not know who he is, but if you look up his list of credits, he's done everything. But watching him show you how he does like a pig's voice and slowly develops it, it's amazing. And then you get to see other voice actors like Kevin Richardson and Mark Hamill arguing with one another about who plays the better Joker. And then Joe DiMaggio, talking about Joe DiMaggio, famous for voicing Bender, and him talking about his day-to-day routine, about how they have to stack jobs on top of one another, where like the lighter jobs are at the beginning of the day, but by the end he has to do the ones where he's yelling or acting in a more guttural voice. So it does, just because by that point his vocal cords will be shredded. It is a phenomenal documentary about the art of voice acting and how they don't get credit for what they do. I just can't express how much a great a documentary that this is. So I Know That Voice.
All right, guys, what's your honorable mentions?
James, I'll let you go first.
One I have to mention, just because I'm amazed it didn't come up before, but Chad talking about comedy. Maybe this is going to be one of your honorable mentions, but it should be. Speaking of Gilbert Gottfried, there is a documentary about a single joke, but it may be one of the best comedy documentaries.
It was
ever
on my
made.
list.
It's
The Aristocrats.
Right? Yeah.
If you've never seen The Aristocrats, it is probably the only way you can do a documentary. And so The Aristocrats is, of course, about the joke that was told, comedians told other comedians.
Yes.
Because back in the day, of course, it would be a violation of.
It honestly was going to be one of my top 3, but then Gilbert surpassed it. The Aristocrats is an amazing documentary. It is in my honorable mentions.
And then on top of that,
it's the documentary that exposed me to seeing how dirty Bob Saget actually was.
All I heard was you got exposed.
There you go. Do you want me to bring the camera down a little bit?
Oh, I'd rather you not. Another one though I wanted to mention, and I thought this may come up under Chad. There's a great documentary, and this is really relevant, I think, in the landscape we live in now, where there are so many comic book films that are out, and often those get credited to one or two creators, right? Whereas most of these characters have been created and recreated over the years. But there's a
James,
great.
if you're going to bring I was going to mention this, but since I brought it up in a previous episode, that's why I chose not to. But go ahead.
There's a great documentary, and Chad. I was going to say Chad did bring this up in a previous episode. Batman and Bill.
Yeah,
is a phenomenal documentary about Bill Finger, and Bill Finger created a lot of what we know as Batman today, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but Bob Kane
Fucking
got all the
Adam
credit.
West gets all the credit.
I really
Fucking
wish if I had phenomenal cosmic power right now, I wouldn't use it to cure a disease. I would use it to literally reach through the screen and hand you a puzzle just so as they put this together.
Puts together Nordberg.
I will say this: there is a great portion of the that documentary where it talks about how he got to write one single episode of the Adam West Batman, and him watching the credits come up. It's a very moving part of the documentary.
Yeah, and so I think that's another great documentary though, because comics are quote unquote all the rage right now, and that's fine and well and all good. But I think it's one of the things that we do tend to not think about, right? And I'm not knocking Stan Lee, though several people, some of which have been guests on our show, would be the first to tell you Stan Lee gets a lot of credit that maybe he doesn't fully deserve. And I'm not knocking Stan Lee.
Batman and Bill, seriously, is one of my favorite documentaries of all time. I just didn't bring it up because I talked about it previously. It is a very moving episode about somebody not getting the credit they have, and also just, you know, somebody who did so much for us and got so little.
And then I brought this one up before, so it's going to be an honorable mention because we brought it up actually. If you follow along with our Australian friends on their podcast, I brought up F is for Fake before, which is another documentary that is just absolutely compelling.
Is it or isn't a documentary? It's so you know, it's such a weird. I almost brought it, and I was like, we've talked about it so many times, but it's such an odd duck.
Yeah, but I argue that it is a documentary, though. Now, how you feel about that, what have you? And the last honorable mention I will have before I shut up and let you all do yours is, and we've talked about this in passing before on the show, but I think it's really relevant in this heyday where this franchise is booming back, and I'm so excited for the new season of which is going to have a crossover I'm really looking forward to. But there's a lot of documentaries about Star Trek. William Shatner did The Captains, which is worth watching in and of itself. But one that I find utterly compelling is Chaos on the Bridge.
Yeah.
Which is about Star Trek, and it's specifically about the making of Star Trek The Next Generation. And I am a huge fan of the original series because that's what I grew up on. The Next Generation came out when I was about 7 years old, and I started to watch it, but I had already been so inundated because it was syndicated and we watched it every night, even though there's only 70 some episodes with the original series, that it remains my favorite. Now, that doesn't mean I don't enjoy any. Don't send me hate mail. I love all of Star Trek, but it does. No, I mean, arguably Deep Space Nine is the most politically compelling. Mm-hmm. Chaos on the Bridge shows very much how none of that should have worked, how bad things were in the beginning. And it has a great lesson, I think, and I mentioned this before, that sometimes, and I'm not knocking Gene Roddenberry, I'm not knocking George Lucas, but sometimes things get better when the original creator steps away and new voices come in. And so if you've not seen Chaos on the Bridge, even if you're not a huge Star Trek fan, it'll give you insight into politics of studios, of all that stuff. Check out Chaos on the Bridge.
Chad,
real quickly, I will mention the one that I brought up for our other podcast, Good Movie Monday, or we contribute to, and Joe will probably post that mini episode sometime down the line. But Call Me Lucky is a great documentary done by Bobcat Goldthwait about his friend who is a somewhat famous comedian in the 70s and early 80s, and then he dropped off the chart to do a very important job that he took upon himself of catching sexual predators against children.
Yeah.
It is a phenomenal episode. It is a phenomenal documentary. It's again one of my favorites, right up there with Batman and Bill. I highly recommend checking that one out. Another one too, where I used to be into wrestling for a brief stint in my life, like 4 or 5 years of my life. I was into wrestling. There's a great documentary called Beyond the Mat that
Mhm.
goes behind the scenes and focuses on, 3 or 4 specific wrestlers. It is very amazing to see what those people put themselves through just to get entertain an audience, and the damage that it does to them.
Mhm.
So Beyond the Mat, uh, John Landis did 2 amazing documentaries. One's pretty well known, Mr. Warmth, the Don Rickles project.
Oh, I could
About
watch that on repeat.
Same here. It was between that or Gilbert. So I had to go with Gilbert because Gilbert has a little bit more to me than Don Rickles. But Don Rickles is one of those comedians that all 3 of us has loved for our entire lives. And it was a great documentary. And then John Landis also did another documentary called Slasher,
Mhm.
about a car salesman who travels around and does, whenever they need to get rid of a bunch of cars real fast, they call him.
Yeah.
It's an amazing documentary about the car industry,
Used car industry.
used car industry. Thank you. I also really liked The Wild and Wonderful Whites of West Virginia.
I was saying about that one. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
about. Go ahead.
No, sorry. It's they're just so this hits me harder than the other two. It's just so
Because you grew up around it.
I just grew up in it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about Jesco White, the dancing outlaw. He had 2 documentaries and a while back about, he's just this guy who knew how to tap dance and was batshit crazy because he grew up in rural West Virginia.
And by the way, did the voice of Grandpa Peepap on Squidbillies.
Squidbillies, yes. And this goes into his further extended family and how they are all equally unique.
Yeah.
Let's just say that the least. I also really like the documentary Crumb.
That's a good one, but it's so disturbing.
It is. It's about the comic book writer Crumb. I can't believe I'm blanking on his first name.
R. Crumb.
R. Crumb, thank you. And how this man is legitimately just one of the weirdest individuals you could ever
But his
meet.
family's worse.
And his family's worse. Yes. It talks about how he used to have a picture. He used to get off on a picture of Bugs Bunny dressed as a woman, and among many other things. It's right up there with the Wild and Wonderful Whites of West Virginia in terms of families who are very unique. And then Grizzly Man, Werner Herzog's documentary about the guy who went to live with grizzlies and got ate alive, essentially. And then finally, just a brief honorable mention to anything Ken Burns does. I will watch a Ken Burns documentary at the drop of a hat. Just to list a couple of my favorites, the baseball series. I loved the baseball series. The Roosevelts, the Civil War is an amazing.
Civil War with that wonderful Shelby Foote voice.
Yeah.
I said this to my students before. If Ken Burns ever does a history of universities, I will lose my job and be ecstatic at the same time.
Yeah. And his deep dive into the Civil War, I found stuff out that I didn't know, and it was amazing. And then also too, the last one I'll mention is the one about the Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
Real quick, it's heartening, but go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chad. No, I agree with the Civil War, and the last one I will say is Rory Kennedy's American Hollow, which also takes place back where I grew up, documenting a family that she'd met, where her uncle, her dad had met many years ago, and how in 100 years this family really hasn't changed. And one of my problems has always been, they've heard this 1,000 times, like, yeah, but if a pan to the left to the right, there'd be a brick home. So American Hollow, Rory Kennedy, I think she gets the family mentality right of some of these folks.
Yeah. And real quick, I know I've already done my honorable mentions. 2 more came to mind as y'all were talking. One would be Overnight. If you're a fan of the movie Boondock Saints, you need to see Overnight because Troy Duffy should own the world. And it's the slogan for this. It was actually filmed because he got his friend to shoot the making of Boondock Saints,
Yeah.
so he could, have this documentary made of his great success. And it ends up becoming, the slogan ended up becoming, there's more than one way to shoot yourself in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And it's all about how everything goes wrong, which leads to my other honorable mention that I didn't think about till y'all were talking. Have either of you ever seen The Best Worst Thing That Ever Could Have Happened?
No.
No.
It is a fascinating documentary. It's about Lonnie Price and the cast of the Stephen Sondheim musical 1981's Merrily We Roll Along. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, Stephen Sondheim's Merrily We Roll Along, the hit play that we all associate with Stephen Sondheim. No, right? Nobody remembers that one. It's because they all assumed it was going to be as successful as all of Stephen Sondheim's other works, and it bombed. And this documentary brings them back together, I think, about a decade or so after it flopped, and said, what went wrong? How do you feel about it? Because, of course, they were all ecstatic because they got cast in a new Stephen Sondheim production that failed.
Right.
So if you're interested in the behind the scenes of how Broadway works, how all that, check out The Best Worst Thing That Ever Could Have Happened. Those are my last two. I'll shut up.
All right, guys. This has been a long documentary one, but thank you so much. Subscribe, tune in, and share. This has been Bonehead Weekly.